I have stood at this post for 41 years, and I have never once doubted why it was built. The Varith Shield Array occupies a ridge lying 11 kilometers above the northern steppes. On clear mornings, you can see the curve of the planet from the observation deck, the faint arc at the edge of the atmosphere where the sky stops being blue and becomes something else. I think about the people who chose this ridge, who blasted the anchor points into the basalt, who ran the first power conduit up the mountain face by hand. They knew what the array was for. They knew they would never see the thing it was built to stop. They built it anyway. That is the part the histories don't quite capture. Not the scale of the infrastructure, not the orbital platforms, not the warship tonnage. What the histories miss is the quality of the decision. The people who founded this post were not afraid. They were methodical. There's a difference, and it matters more than any weapon system I could name. The old chief of array operations, a woman named Heron Voss, who had spent 60 years at altitude, walked me out to the observation deck on my first morning. She pointed at a faint line crossing the upper atmosphere, the Keth Margin station transiting at dawn, and she said, "We built all of it because someone remembered. Your job is to keep remembering." I have kept remembering. The signal came in on the deep band receiver at 0417 Planetary Standard Time. I was running a scheduled calibration on the secondary induction coils. Routine maintenance, the kind of work that fills most of a career here and that most people find tedious. I do not find it tedious. I find it honest. The signal was not a broadcast. It was a carrier pulse, tight beam, aimed at Earth's northern hemisphere from a source that the automated tracking system logged as 11 light minutes out and closing. The format was biological, encoded in protein chain sequencing rather than electromagnetic modulation, a transmission medium so old that the array's recognition library had to reach back through 4 archive updates to identify it. I knew what it was before the identification completed. The Sketh Convergence had sent a reclamation pulse. I sat with that for a moment. 41 years at altitude, and I had run the simulations, read the doctrine files, attended the briefings that came down from Planetary Defense Command every decade or so, dry, calm documents with titles like Dormant Biological Vector, Contingency Protocol Revision. But knowing a thing in doctrine is not the same as watching the tracking system log an actual inbound source and print a classification that has not appeared on any active duty screen in recorded operational history. 320,000 years. That is how long the Sketh Convergence had been absent. They had not left quietly. The deep histories describe what they had done on departure. Seeding. A reclamation pulse embedded dormant biological primers into the northern landmass, keyed to wake on a frequency only a convergence harvester ship could generate. Come back when ready, transmit the frequency, and whatever life had grown up in the interim would cease. The world would be processed. They had not considered that something might be listening for the activation frequency. I opened a channel to Planetary Defense Command. The duty officer, a young captain named Cyril, voice still rough with early morning watch, acknowledged the signal log and went quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Array Varith, confirm classification. Confirmed. Sketh Reclamation Carrier Pulse. Inbound. Source tracking at 11 light minutes. Closing at 0.04 standard. Biological encoding format. Convergence pattern. Authentication against archive protocol is positive. Another silence. Then, grid authorization is yours, Chief. All platforms, all batteries. You have the answer. That was the whole of it. No long deliberation. No emergency council convened. The protocol existed. It had been written and revised and tested and revised again over 300,000 years of preparation. And when the moment came, the protocol simply ran. That is what readiness looks like from the inside. It is not dramatic. It is quiet and complete, and it moves without hesitation because every hesitation was worked out long ago by people who are no longer alive to see the result of their care. I keyed the grid. 96 orbital platforms came to active status in sequence, their power signatures blooming on my board like lights coming on in a city after dark. The Solin battery, 14 linked rail emplacements running along the mountain range to the east, built in the crater of a range that had not existed until the fourth Great Construction period, confirmed ready. 44 warships on station in the inner system acknowledged the grid signal and moved to intercept bearing, not rushing, arranging themselves with the patience of machines that have been maintained in readiness for exactly this. The convergence harvester entered visual range of the outer sensor net 18 minutes after first contact. I watched it on the tracking display, a vast organic structure, segmented, dark, trailing atmospheric ice as it decelerated into the system. It was enormous. I will not diminish it. It was a thing built by a civilization that had crossed interstellar distances before humanity had learned to smelt iron, and it carried within it the accumulated biological processing capability of a species that had been harvesting worlds for a very long time. It was also broadcasting its activation pulse. The pulse hit Earth's upper atmosphere and found the primers it was looking for. What it also found, woven through the primer response layer like a second voice answering a call it had been waiting 320,000 years to receive, was our counter signal. The array had been broadcasting the counter frequency on a low-power loop since the second construction period, a continuous, patient nullification of the activation sequence, updated with every revision of the protocol, never interrupted. The primers had been neutralized so long ago that the geological record didn't show them anymore. But the counter signal kept broadcasting anyway, because that was the protocol, and the protocol did not stop. The convergence's activation pulse found nothing to activate. What it found instead was the grid answer. I routed it through the standard broadcast array rather than the tight beam, wide dispersion. Every frequency the convergence biological encoding used translated into their carrier format by the same archive library that had identified their signal. The message was not complicated. It did not need to be. It was the power signatures of 96 platforms and 44 warships and the Solen battery and every other defense installation on and above this planet, broadcast simultaneously, with the coordinates of each one appended in sequence, so that the convergence's tracking systems could verify every reading independently. Then the array transmitted the archive record. 320,000 years of continuous documentation. Every decade logged. Every protocol revision filed. Every generation of technicians who had stood at posts like this one, in weather like this weather, running calibrations and reading doctrine and keeping the counter signal alive. The archive was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a receipt, proof that every year of those 320,000 had been accounted for, that not one of them had been forgotten, that the world they had come back to harvest had spent every moment of their absence preparing for exactly this morning. The convergence spent 11 minutes in stillness. A hive mind does not negotiate the way a single commander does. What I watched on the tracking display was the harvester ship's drive signature fluctuating, its course holding, then shifting, then holding again, as if a vast collective intelligence was working through something it had built no framework to process. It had come expecting an empty world or a weak one. It had transmitted its activation pulse with the confidence of a civilization that had never once returned to find its primers answered with a counter signal 300,000 years old. At minute 14, the harvester began to turn. It moved with the deliberate weight of something large making a decision it cannot reverse. The drive's signature strengthened, the course resolved outbound, and within the hour its trace faded below the sensor threshold. The warships returned to station, unhurried. No shots fired. No engagement. The Solen battery stayed warm, but never discharged. I filed the contact report at 0742. Standard format. Sketh convergence reclamation attempt, counter signal effective, grid answer transmitted, contact broken, no casualties. I noted the date and the duration and sent it up the chain, where it would be logged and carried forward into the next revision of the protocol. Then I went back to the secondary induction coils. The calibration still needed finishing. The work doesn't stop because the thing you were ready for finally arrived. It stops when there is nothing left to be ready for. And that morning I was not ready to stop. Aaron Voss was right. The job is to keep remembering. The rest, the platforms, the batteries, the warships, the archive, the counter signal running low and patient through 300,000 years of empty sky. All of it follows from that. You remember, and you prepare, and and you tend the thing you built. And when the morning comes that tests it, you find the work was already done by hands older than yours, for mornings they knew they would never see. That is what it means to be ready.